25. Allie woke me around 11:30 to tell me that the new girl, Indigo, was asking to see the guy who had rescued her. I said thanks and yawned much more nonchalantly than I felt. As soon as she had left, I jumped out of the sleeping bag and ran to the bathroom to make myself presentable. This consisted mostly of patting down my sleep-tousled hair and shaking my head at the bruising around my eyes, which had now faded to an ugly yellowish green. I decided that I had done all I could and walked a short distance from the bathroom to the supply closet Sonny had given Indigo as a room. Strange. I felt more nervous than I had when we faced off against the gangbangers. I knocked on the door. "Come in." "Okay," I said, and opened the door. I found her sitting on the folded mat that was her makeshift bed, warm blankets gathered around her legs. She looked up at me and smiled. "Isaac, right?" she said. "I just wanted to thank you again. I say again, but in all the hustle and bustle of last night, I'm not sure I even managed to thank you the first time." "Don't mention it. Luke did more than me. He even carried you back. Besides, we make a habit of rescuing damsels." Almost as soon as the flippant words were out of my mouth, I thought of Sarah. "Yeah, I know. I thanked him too," she said. And then, perhaps noticing the sadness on my face, "One day you'll have to tell me about these other damsels you saved." "Does that mean you plan on sticking with us then?" I asked, trying not to sound too desperate. The last thing I wanted to do was come across as some sort of lecherous weirdo. "Yeah, if no one minds," she replied. "This place seems safe and comfortable." She paused as she saw me bite my lip. "What is it?" "You probably haven't heard yet, but we're kind of planning to leave the academy tomorrow morning sometime. It's getting too dangerous here. We found out something, and it means we have to get out. And quick. You can come with us, of course." Okay," she said, puzzled. "I guess I've got nothing keeping me here in Worcester." I blabbed. I couldn't help it. Her attentiveness and soft nature just put me at ease. I ended up telling her about Huiyan's warning that the Chinese army was sending a division to Worcester. I also told her about the offer of the truck and my fears it might be a trap. I even talked about traveling to the safe haven. She seemed as excited as I was about the safe haven, especially as it was as close as just 100 miles or so north of us. In the end, I talked to her for over an hour that day, about the future, but also about the past. I found myself opening up to her and telling her about my life before the flu. It seemed I wasn't good at keeping secrets from pretty girls, but it wasn't just that. Even though I'd only known her for a few hours, I felt I could trust her with my life. And after what I'd already told her, I probably had. She told me about her life as well. She was born and raised in Worcester. Like myself, Indigo had just turned 15 years old. In fact, her birthday was 2 days before mine. While she had not been a total loner in school like me, she hadn't been one of the popular kids either. From our talk, I began to realize just how smart she was. It became obvious that she was way more book smart than I was. Yet she didn't seem to have that in-your-face, smarty-pants attitude so many smart people have. She told me she had grown bored of school and had let her grades slip, despite the fact that she was perfectly capable of doing the work. Too many missed days and late assignments had torpedoed her marks to the point where her near-perfect test scores were not able to compensate. Her family had been a large, tight-knit family, with many aunts, uncles, and grandparents, along with a dozen or so cousins, all living in the same neighborhood. Despite this, Indigo was like myself, an only child. And now, she, too, was all alone in the world. She began to cry as she told me how close she had been to her cousin, Chloe, and I realized just how deeply it affected her when she was murdered by the Tigers. It must have felt a lot like losing a sister. I asked her what happened. I saw hot anger dry the tears in her eyes. They were gathering food in a small supermarket when 3 tigers happened upon them. The tigers were rude and suggestive to the girls, and Chloe, always the sassier of the two, had smart-mouthed the ringleader. He shot her, just like that. Indigo and the other gang members had stood frozen in shock before she took off and ran for her life. He shot at her as she escaped but missed, and she had managed to elude them until the day before. I felt a seething anger at the dumb cruelty of the gang. Talking about it seemed to help, but I was relieved when the subject changed. Speaking of loved ones made me think of my own sister, Rebecca. I almost had trouble picturing her face in my mind now. Even the memories of my mom and dad were slowly vanishing in the same way, like old photographs fading to sepia in a forgotten shoebox. For some reason, I even told her of Amy, my foster sister, and how she had tried to be like a big sister to me that last Christmas day. I felt a hot rush of guilt about how unfriendly I had been on what was probably her last day alive. Then I told her about Sarah. Strangely, the loss of my real family and the Fosters didn't come close to feeling as fresh or painful as the loss of Sarah, and I wondered if something was wrong with me, or if it was just the fact that, for the first time in my life, I had lost someone that was in my care, someone who had looked up to me, trusted me with her life. "I think that's it exactly," said Indigo, putting a hand on my arm. I felt a jolt of electricity at her touch, and wondered if she did too. A knock on the door ended our intense conversation, and Indigo withdrew her hand as the door opened, and Karen stuck her head in. "Sonny would like to see you in his office, Isaac," she said. "I already told Luke and Arthur. They'll meet you there." "Thanks," I said, as she rushed off. I turned to Indigo. "I've got to go, but I'd like to talk to you more sometime, if it's okay with you." "Sure," Indigo said. "I enjoyed our talk. It feels so good just to be talking about what happened and remembering the people we lost. It feels cathartic? I think that's the word." I smiled. One thing Indigo and I had in common was a love of words. I even remember reading through a dictionary for fun during the 7th and 8th grades. It sounds nerdy, I know, but it's a fond memory, especially given there are no schools now, and won't be for a long time. No teachers, no students, nothing except survivors and invaders. I got up and paused at the door. I don't know if Sonny has told the others about Huion yet, so maybe not mention that to anyone yet. "No worries," she said, and gave me a wink. I headed to Sonny's office with a skip in my step, her touch still tingling on my arm. When I got to Sonny's office, I knocked and then walked right in. Arthur and Luke were already there. Sonny sat behind his desk, glanced up as I entered, motioning. Luke gave me a little salute, but Arthur didn't look up as he intently studied a spiral notebook open on Sonny's desk. "So, I take it you came up with a plan?" I asked. "Yeah, most of the details are written down." "It looks solid to me, man," Luke said. "I just hope we don't run into any unforeseen trouble." Arthur slid the notebook in my direction, and I looked over the plan Sonny had outlined. It seemed simple enough, barring any trouble from the Tigers or a Chinese patrol, and getting the truck should be a piece of cake. "So, what do you think, Isaac?" "I agree with Luke. It seems solid." "So, when are we going to do this?" Luke asked. "Yeah, I'd like to get it done and over with as soon as possible," Arthur said. Sonny checked the watch on his wrist. "We will leave here at 1600. Make sure you have your stuff ready." "Want to head over to the kitchen and grab some lunch?" Luke asked, as we left the office. "There are a couple cans of chili con carne back there with our names on them." 26. After a relatively hearty meal of cold chili con carne with beans, I grabbed a couple of mixed fruit cups and a spoon to take back to Indigo's room. I still had a couple hours to kill before we went to retrieve the truck, and everything I planned to take with me was already in a pile next to my sleeping bag. With that in mind and remembering how good our earlier conversation had been, I was keen to talk with her some more. Unfortunately, I found her already in deep conversation with Brooke and Karen. Not wishing to intrude, I gave Indigo the fruit cups and said I'd catch up later. "That's very thoughtful of you, Isaac," said Brooke, with a wicked glint in her eyes. I felt my face heat up a few notches and shrugged before closing the door on them a little too quickly. The sound of their cheeky laughter followed me down the hall. Not knowing what to do with myself, I decided to go find Ben and ask him what they had been searching for in the office building. I figured if Brooke was back, he would be as well. I found him in our sleeping area, playing chess against Luke and looking very frustrated. I settled in to watch the end of the game silently as Luke slowly dismantled Ben's defenses. After 4 moves, Luke declared checkmate and sat back with a satisfied smirk on his face. Ben looked at the table in disbelief for a few seconds before holding out his hand. "Good game," he said, looking like he had sucked a lemon as Luke shook his hand. "So, did you guys find anything interesting in the office building?" I asked him. "Not really, but I dare say we got what Sonny sent us there to get," he said. "Why he'd want all those toner cartridges is beyond me." "Toner cartridges? Like from photocopiers?" "Yes," Ben said, "plus several reams of printer paper and as many rolls of tape as we could find." "Why would he want those?" I asked. "Beats the hell out of me," Luke said, and rubbed his hands together. "I love a good mystery, though. Hey, maybe he's starting a newspaper? The Post-Apocalyptic Times." "Hardy har har," I said. "I'm sure he has his reasons, so we'll find out soon enough." "Are you going to take the rifle with you this afternoon?" Luke asked. I felt a short stab of remorse as I remembered what had happened the last time I held the rifle. I knew the gang member I shot had deserved it, but emotionally I wasn't quite ready to take responsibility for ending another human life so brutally. "I don't know. I was thinking about just sticking with a handgun on this one," I said, looking down at the chessboard. I wondered if Luke ever felt the same way about the tiger he had killed with the crossbow. In the time since, I've found the killing gets easier, but the twinges of regret or guilt never really go away. The circumstances don't matter, really. It doesn't matter how bad the other person was. I always ask myself if maybe I could have done something different. And I always remember. "You want to play?" I asked. "No, I already had my fun," Luke replied. "Maybe Ben wants to play and redeem himself." "What do you say?" I asked Ben. "Sure, I'm always up for another game," he said, reaching for the pieces to reset the board. The sky clouded over during the day. This had the benefit of warming the night slightly, but at a cost. It had gotten darker earlier, and there was no moonlight to see by. Sonny, Arthur, Luke, and I cautiously made our way back to the parking garage, hugging the buildings and keeping to the alleyways and side streets as much as possible. The Chinese army was on all of our minds, but Sonny thought it was the red tigers we really needed to watch for. He was right. The parking garage was well inside their territory, and they were bound to be angry about losing 2 members the previous day. Sonny seemed to know a lot about them, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Thinking about the tigers made me realize it was less than 24 hours since I killed another human being. I'm pretty sure he was the first. The looter I had shot in front of the Foster's home had already looked sick. Maybe the leg wound had sped up his demise, but I'm certain it wasn't fatal. The thought of coming across one of the friends of the tiger I had killed chilled me in the way the cold night couldn't, and I was worried the others might suffer as a consequence of my actions. We walked through the darkness in near silence, moving carefully and by a circuitous route. It took us nearly an hour to reach the parking garage. As we arrived, the first flakes of a fresh snowfall began drifting down from the now completely dark sky. The plan called for Arthur and me to stay near the parking garage entrance, out of sight from the street, but where we could keep an eye on things. Sonny and Luke would continue to the truck, make sure everything was okay, and disable the GPS using Huion's instructions before picking Arthur and I up on the way out. Sonny and Arthur were dressed in their black clothes, while Luke and I wore normal clothes and parkas. Nodding farewell to Luke and Sonny, I found a car to crouch behind, which afforded me a good view of the entrance. Arthur followed the others as far as the stairwell leading to the other levels and faded into the shadows. I realized, of course, that he was not a real ninja, but he sure did a good impression of one. 5 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. While I knew it must have been at least a little warmer inside the parking garage, I honestly didn't feel it. I was as cold as I'd been since we left my hometown. My fingers were like ice, and I placed my pistol on the concrete floor and rubbed my hands together for warmth. It had seemed dark outside, but now that I was crouched in the darkness of the parking garage looking toward the opening to the street, I understood just how much darker it was in there when I plainly saw 4 silhouettes appear in the entrance. My heart skipped a beat before starting to race. Tigers. That much was clear. One of them was holding a spiked baseball bat. Shit. They were speaking, but I was too far away to hear what they were saying. After a time, one pointed in my direction, and then towards the stairwell Arthur had disappeared into. 2 of the figures split off and headed deeper into the garage, toward me, while the guy giving the orders and the 4th headed for the stairwell. I tensed, and moving as slowly and quietly as I could, picked up the .38. I was comforted only a little by the cold, heavy weight of it in my hand. The tigers, including the one holding the nail-studded baseball bat, came directly towards my hiding position. As he got closer, I saw from his shape that it was the one Luke had christened Bat Boy after our earlier skirmish. With him was a taller, younger Asian teenager. Both of them had automatic pistols shoved in their waistbands. As they approached, I slowly scooted around the vehicle, keeping it between us. The last thing I wanted to do was use my revolver. I knew any shots would bring their other 2 friends running, and if they were armed with guns too, I didn't like my chances in a 4-on-1 shootout, or even 4-on-2 if Arthur came to back me up. Daring to cast a quick glance in that direction, I saw the other 2 tigers must have already entered the other stairwell. I took the relative silence from that direction as a positive sign that they had not stumbled over Arthur, so I quickly switched my focus back to the other 2. They had stopped no more than 10 feet away from where I crouched. "Are you sure it was them?" the taller one asked Bat Boy. "The bastards who killed Sammy and Jack?" "At least one of them," Bat Boy said. "I recognize the jacket of the kid with the crossbow." "Come on, let's keep going, and keep an eye out. Chen doesn't want them to slip past us and get out if they hear him and Hammer on the stairs," he said. "We better not slip up. I've never seen him as mad as when you told him Jack was dead. I feel sorry for the poor son of a bitch who was stupid enough to kill his kid brother." "Yeah, that little shit better hope he dies from a bullet, because if we capture his ass—" He slapped the nail-free part of his bat into the palm of his hand. I jerked at the loud slap and almost overbalanced. Chen's brother. The way they were talking. Chen was obviously the leader. And it turns out I had killed his brother. No wonder they were so pissed. The 2 tigers started walking again, and were soon far enough beyond where I crouched for me to relax a little. That feeling was short-lived, however, when it dawned on me that Luke and Sonny were in real danger. I had no way of getting past the tigers, either of the pairs, to give warning. Even if they finished with the truck and got it up and running before the tigers got to their level, they would have to drive right by at least 2 of the armed thugs to get out. I hoped Arthur had managed to get down the stairwell to warn Luke and Sonny before the 2 tigers headed that direction had seen him. That would be something, but getting out would still be a hell of a problem. Looking into the parking garage toward where the 2 tigers had vanished in the darkness, I strained and could hear the faint sound of their footsteps getting further away. When I judged them to be distant enough, I broke cover from where I was crouched and furtively moved to the stairwell. I had been in the stairwell before, when we had left the garage after burning the first Chinese truck. The street level of the parking garage was the top floor. The other 6 floors were located underneath, so from here the stairs only went one direction, down into the darkness. The stairs were located at the back of a small alcove with an elevator door in one wall. The stairs wound around the elevator shaft's column as they descended. There was a landing and an elevator door on each garage level. I paused at the entrance to the alcove, listening for the sounds of the tigers on the stairs. I didn't hear them, but I distinctly heard hurried footsteps coming towards me from behind. I spun around and found a middle-aged Chinese man sprinting at me from the street entrance. He pulled a long carving knife out of his belt as he came. Adrenaline kicked in, and abandoning any notion of stealth, I brought up the revolver and squeezed the trigger twice. The booms echoed through the parking garage. The first shot missed. I've no idea where the bullet went. The second shot struck the onrushing man just above the sternum, about an inch to the left. I expected him to be knocked backwards by the force of the shot. After all, it always happens that way in movies. But he just jerked slightly and kept coming. I stepped back against the wall, watching in disbelief as he steamed straight for me. The thought he might be wearing a bulletproof vest crossed my mind, and I was preparing to fire again when, 2 steps later, his legs gave out, and he slammed face down onto the cold pavement in front of me. Hearing a noise in the alcove behind me, I spun again with my .38 raised in trembling hands. The elevator doors were being pried open. As they slowly parted, I saw the elevator car itself was stuck someplace between this floor and the one below. About a foot of the car could be seen along with its roof, and there crouched Arthur. "Hurry up and get in here," he whispered fiercely, "before every tiger in the neighborhood shows up." I heard running footsteps from the car park as I clambered up next to him, and we worked to close the doors again. "What about Luke and Sonny?" I asked, puffing with exertion. "I already warned them. They should be hiding in the bottom of the shaft," he whispered, as the doors finally met. Darkness, absolute and impenetrable, cloaked the elevator shaft when the doors closed. "Keep your gun handy in case somebody tries to open these doors, but try not to move around or talk too much. We don't want to give them a reason to search here." It didn't take long before we could hear agitated voices talking loudly outside the elevator doors. Although we couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, the man I'd shot had been found. Not exactly surprising, since I'd left him lying out in the open. Adrenaline was still coursing through me, and I felt more than a little bit jittery. So much so that when someone hammered on the door, I pointed my gun in that direction and was about to squeeze the trigger. I felt Arthur's hand touch my shoulder. "No," he said, his whisper barely audible in my ear. "Shoot only if you see light from the sliding doors opening, and make every shot count." The voices outside the elevator died down, and after a while, stopped altogether. I thought they had left to continue their search through the parking garage, or perhaps went out to comb the streets, thinking we'd slipped out after shooting their rear guard. But I couldn't be certain. For all we knew, there could be a tiger standing in the alcove, waiting for somebody to stick their head out. "Should we try the door?" I whispered to Arthur. "No, too risky right now," he said, producing a small flashlight from the pouch on his belt. He flicked it on. The cone of light played over the walls and floor of the shaft, and then he pointed it up. The building that the parking garage was located under was a 4-story office building which held mostly law offices and accounting firms, if the sign at the front was any indication. The shaft continued up into the building above, although Arthur's torchlight didn't reach that high. It did, however, illuminate the elevator doors of the 2 stories above us. "Do you think that they'll be searching for us in the office building itself?" I asked. "I doubt it. Not yet, anyway. The only door from the parking garage into the building lobby is closed off with a chain and a padlock. I found that out when Sonny had me scout this place when we were looking for places to dump the first truck we took. As long as the chain's in place on that door, they won't think we went in there, and the stairs only lead down further into the parking garage." "Do you think we can get up there?" "I don't know," Arthur said. "I was hoping that there would be some sort of maintenance ladder or something, but there isn't. I don't think climbing the cables would be that easy, and even if we did, I'm not sure how we would get the doors open while clinging to them." "I see what you mean," I said. "Although, the doors have rails they slide on. Maybe we could stand on the rails to one side of the door and push them open." "Yeah, maybe," Arthur said, not sounding convinced. "Another option would be to hide in the elevator car itself. There's an access hatch over there." He shone the light over to illuminate a trapdoor a few feet from where I crouched. With the narrowness of the hatch, I don't think any tigers checking the elevator shaft from above would look for us in there. "Yeah, but if they did climb down and find us inside, well, it would be like shooting fish in a barrel. Not sure I want to be a fish." Arthur switched his light off, and we squatted there in silence for a few moments. In my mind, it seemed the question was mostly theoretical, as we seemed to be safe where we were for the time being. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and a vague sense of exhaustion was replacing the jittery excitement that I had been feeling. "How long do you think we should wait before we do something?" I asked him. "Let's give it another few minutes." "Sounds good to me," I answered. We waited silently, my brain working overtime as it cycled through the different ways this could end, most of them bad. Finally, Arthur whispered, "Okay, let's give it 100 count." "Okay." I began to count upwards from 1 in my head. I took my time, carefully regulating my count speed with a Mississippi between each number. It was a long 100 seconds. We didn't hear a sound outside, but that didn't ease the tension and fear I felt at the prospect of leaving our little sanctuary. Arthur finished counting before I did, switching his flashlight on while I was still in the low 90s. Holding the light in his mouth, he stepped up to the door and began to pull it open. The inner door opened easily, but the outer door required more work, and I began to appreciate just how difficult it had been for him to get in here and then to allow me in later. We got the outer door open a crack, and I put my eye to it. I couldn't see anyone waiting to ambush us, so I gave Arthur a nod. We grabbed one door each and slid them open enough to allow us to get out. He hopped out first, and I followed. The stairwell alcove was empty, but the body of the man I shot had been pulled to one side. "They'll still be around here someplace," Arthur said quietly. "The Tigers aren't known for giving up." "That's not going to help their mood either," I said, nodding toward the dead man regretfully. Now that we were back out of the pitch darkness of the elevator, I had to ask him something I was curious about. "How did you know?" I asked. "How did you know I was going to shoot my gun in there? There's no way you could possibly have seen me in the dark." "You stopped breathing," Arthur said. "Sonny taught me holding one's breath is often a sign that violent or stressful action is about to be undertaken." "You must have super hearing," I said, pondering that a moment. "I wonder how he and Luke are doing." "Well, we haven't heard gunfire, so I guess they're okay for the moment. We can't think too much about it, though. They'll have to handle it themselves. We have to decide what we're going to do." "Yeah, what are you thinking?" "As I see it, we have 3 options. We can try and make our way down to the truck and the others. We can bail and go back to the academy, or we can stay here and basically do nothing." "Option 2 is out," I said. "I'm not going back while they're still in danger." "If we stick to Sonny's plan, we should stay here and wait for them," Arthur said. "Luke likes to say that no plan survives first contact with the enemy," I said. "I think we'll need some revisions to Sonny's plan." I looked at the stairwell and then toward the parking garage. "I think we should head down, but instead of the stairs, we should go down the ramps. If we try the stairwell, there's always the chance we'll miss Luke and Sonny leaving in the truck. If we walk down the parking ramps and they happen to be on the way out, we can just jump in." "Fine. If that's what you want to do, let's do it," Arthur said. He sounded a little peeved that I was taking control and tried to wrest it back. "We are going to move quick and quiet, stay low, and keep a good lookout. And for God's sake, don't shoot anybody." "I'll do my best," I said, shrugging my shoulders. Creeping along the inner wall of the parking garage, we moved as swiftly as we could while still being stealthy. I knew I didn't want to be taken unawares by a couple of gangbangers, and I was sure that Arthur felt the same way. Mom, my real mom, used to say if wishes were fishes, we'd walk on the sea, as a way of telling me I wasn't always going to be able to get everything I wanted. Back then, when I was just a kid, I never understood what she meant. I do now. We had just rounded the first turn in the garage when the guy with the bat stepped out from behind a car right in front of me. A shot of adrenaline sent my heart racing in my chest. I ducked as the bat whistled through the air where my head had just been, slamming into a car's fender, the nails denting it and scratching the metal. I tried to bring the .38 up, but the gangbanger's foot caught me in the pit of my stomach, and I was knocked backwards to the ground, the air whooshing out of my lungs. The revolver slipped from my grasp and skittered a dozen feet across the cold pavement. "I got one!" he shouted, stepping over me as I lay gasping for breath. "It's the guy who gunned down Jack. I'll bet you wish you had a machine gun now, don't you, bitch? You little punk-ass bitch!" He raised the bat, its wicked nails shining silver in the dimness of the parking garage. I held my hands up in a futile gesture of self-defense. Shit! I closed my eyes as he swung and waited for the blow. It never came. Instead, I heard a grunt of pain and surprise. I opened my eyes as the tiger stumbled to one side, the bat now in one hand as his other struggled to reach around under his shoulder blade. Arthur was a few feet away, balancing on the balls of his feet, but the tiger was oblivious. His face, which had been etched with hate only a moment ago, was now pale. His eyes widened as he found what he had been reaching. I watched, hypnotized. Finally, he gained purchase on whatever he was reaching for, and took a deep breath before jerking his arm violently. He looked at the bloody object in his hand in disbelief. I had seen throwing knives like it before on the racks in the academy attic. While he was distracted, I started to slowly crawl backwards away from him. I needed that gun. My attacker started to turn, as if he suddenly realized that if there had been a knife in his back, then... Arthur hit the man with a vicious kick to the same place the knife had struck. Roaring with pain and stumbling with the force of the kick, the gangbanger turned to face him while swinging the bat one-handed. Arthur walked into the swing, and the thug's arm, rather than his bat, slammed into Arthur's side. Allowing this to happen was evidently part of Arthur's plan, because he then brought his right arm down to trap the wrist of the tiger and at the same time gave him a brutal palm strike to the chin. Bat Boy didn't even groan as he fell to the floor. "Are you all right?" Arthur asked as I scooped up the revolver and scrambled to my feet. "Yeah, thanks," I gasped. I was trying to regain my breath, but stood partially bent over while I sucked wind. "Is he dead?" "Not yet," Arthur replied, "but we should finish him off before we move." His words were cut off by 3 impossibly loud gunshots coming from behind the car to our side. I dropped to the ground and heard Arthur drop behind me. I scrambled to the car and peered under it, scanning for the feet of the gunman on the far side. I couldn't see any. "Are you okay?" I whispered to Arthur, still straining to see. "Arthur?" I turned. Arthur was lying on his side, his eyes open and unblinking as a deep crimson, almost black pool of blood formed around him. "Shit. Arthur?" A scuffing noise brought me back to reality, and I quickly looked under the car again. This time, my gaze fell on a pair of red leather cowboy boots moving cautiously toward the car I was lying behind. Figuring the other tigers were probably already on their way, I decided this was it. I was going to go out in a blaze of glory. I aimed my gun at the cowboy boots, and almost as if he wanted to be shot, the wearer stopped perfectly still, one leg behind the other. "Roy?" he called. I pulled the trigger. The roar of the handgun was deafening. The bullet struck the tiger wearing the cowboy boots in the right ankle and continued on through his left heel. There was a cry of agony as he collapsed to the concrete, his gun clattering away when he used his hands to break his fall. The wounded man turned his head, and his eyeballs locked onto mine. For a moment that stretched on forever, we stared at each other. I knew the fear I saw in his eyes was mirrored in my own. He reached for his pistol. I shot him in the forehead. 27. I'd taken my first human life less than 24 hours before, and now I'd taken 2 more. It seemed I was on a roll. Maybe I was responsible for another as well, I reminded myself. Arthur. I felt sick. Arthur was only here because I had wanted to come this way. It may sound strange, but right at that moment, Arthur's death weighed on me more heavily than the lives I had actually taken. As I lay on the cold concrete in shock, I thought about Karen. If I managed to get back to the academy in one piece, I was going to have to tell her that Arthur was dead. As I'd watched them together over the week, I remembered thinking how lucky they were to have each other as the world was falling apart around them. Now, because of my decision, Karen was going to have to face this shithole of a world alone. Is this really what being a leader is? Getting people killed with the choices I make? The thought frightened me. Who would ever willingly accept such a responsibility? I waited a minute, but didn't hear or see anyone rushing my way. Warily, I slowly pulled myself up into a crouch and peeked over the hood of the car. My luck ran out. In the gloom of the garage ahead, I saw two figures appear. They were moving slowly, one holding some form of handgun and the other a rifle or shotgun. I couldn't tell which. I swung open the cylinder of my .38 and with trembling hands shook the 4 spent cartridges into my hand and carefully set them on the floor. In my pocket I found some new shells and reloaded the revolver. I was trembling so much as I closed the chamber that I was almost in disbelief that I hadn't dropped any shells. Staying low, I moved toward the back of the car, trying to find a better position from which to make my last defense. They kept coming, bold as life, walking to the middle of the lot, slow and deliberate. They were about 20 yards away from where I looked over the trunk of the car, ready to duck if they aimed at me. I knew instantly that one of them was the leader, Chen, the brother of the one I had killed in the alley. How did I know? I'm not sure, except to say that his fearless and self-confident march toward my hiding place marked him as a leader. He was tall and well-built, and despite the cold, wore a black, sleeveless muscle shirt. "Don't come any closer," I yelled, trying to sound more confident than I was. The man walking with Chen stopped instantly, but the leader sauntered on. "Stop!" This time he did, but not in a submissive way. He planted his feet and kept his hands by his side, the shotgun pointed safely at the floor. I took in his hard face and slicked back hair. Then he laughed at me. Of all the things that I expected, this was not one of them. I felt myself redden. As a child, I hated kids at school laughing at me when I wasn't in on the joke. It had made me feel weak and stupid. In the vulnerable state I was in right then, his scorn succeeded in doing just that. "Well, what have we here? A little man with a big gun. Why don't you come out and we'll talk about all this nonsense?" He actually sounded reasonable, and I almost stood up, but then I spotted his buddy take a step. "I said stop!" I yelled and fired a warning shot into the air. It hit the concrete above me and the bullet ricocheted dangerously close. As the chip